The man wanted to try a more thrilling game. He first took out a pair of handcuffs and fastened his wife to the bed. Then, he swallowed a pill. But suddenly, an accident happened. His wife was horrified to discover that her husband had suddenly suffered a heart attack. At that moment, his face twisted in pain, and then he collapsed directly onto Annie. The sudden accident terrified Annie. She kept calling out to her husband, but there was never any response. Annie used all her strength to lift her husband's body, but because she couldn't keep her balance, his body fell heavily backward. Annie quickly lifted her head to check, but she could only see one of his arms. In that instant, Annie was overwhelmed by endless panic, because this was her husband's house in the countryside, and there were no neighbors around. She tried to remove the handcuffs, but the shape of the bedpost perfectly blocked them. Unable to take off the cuffs, she grew even more terrified. She started to think this was her husband's prank, and she begged him desperately to get up. But when she saw blood flowing across the floor, Annie completely broke down. She kept shouting loudly, hoping someone would pass by. Time quickly passed into the evening, and Annie was already exhausted. Then suddenly, she heard a sound at the door. She hurriedly called out for help. As the shadow drew closer, it turned out to be a stray dog that walked in. Seeing this filled Annie with disappointment, but as she watched the wild dog approach her husband step by step, Annie immediately sensed danger. No matter how she tried to drive it away, the dog refused to leave the room. The heavy smell of blood drew the stray closer, until it even bit into her husband's arm. Annie struggled desperately, but the cuffs only allowed her hands to move up and down. In desperation, she grabbed a book and threw it at the dog, but the stray dog still refused to leave. Annie immediately broke down in tears. The next moment, her husband suddenly crawled up from the ground. Annie couldn't believe it. She kept urging him to unlock the cuffs, but when she turned her head back toward the floor, she saw her husband's corpse again. Two identical husbands in the same room. Annie had no idea why this was happening. The husband in front of her told her to stay calm. What appeared before her was only a hallucination. Now she had no choice but to find a way to save herself. With her husband's encouragement, Annie's eyes turned back to the handcuffs. She regained some composure. Enduring the pain, she used all her strength to break free. Luckily, her hands were small. With relentless effort, she finally managed to slip one hand out of the cuffs. She laughed with relief. Once one hand was free, the other side was much easier. Annie broke the bedpost with force, removed the handcuffs easily, and finally succeeded. But just as she was about to leave the room, she turned back to look at her husband only to find herself still chained to the bed.